This thing just died on me. It's what lasted 4 hours, and it's not the batteries either. The batteries are fine, they work and everything else. Just this thing is trash. Oh well, on a ridiculously hot day, what can I do other than take off my scarf? Use another one. I should turn it off if I'm going to do recording. Hello Internet, I'm Oliver Worley from Ikarus' workshop, and I wanted to start off with all the new quality that I've got here in terms of audio and all the new visual stuff that I managed to get. Ignore the ignore the watermark here. But I wanted to do a philosophy video and just kind of think about something that I've been thinking about a lot. Just kind of discuss it, my interpretations, break down what I find, how people misunderstand it, and actually do something of some reasonable use with it. And that's discussing guilt, understanding guilt, responsibilities, and how to judge people. At least, vaguely on that topic, at least. Forgive me if I go wandering, but, I've got a general founding. I've been thinking about it a lot. I feel like I've got some useful points that are worth. So, with the power of editing, I've just cut out about 10 minutes of me rambling, because I didn't like it, wasn't useful, and it wasn't even on topic yet. So instead, I'm just going to get straight into it, because I don't want an hour video and only 5 minutes of it are important. So, when thinking about guilt, I've always found there are two main philosophies that take precedence over everything else. The idea of consequentialism and intentionalism when it comes to judging someone or putting guilt forward. And while they're both useful, I feel that they both, are relatively limited. Whatever, I'll kind of expand on them. So essentially, so consequentialism is an accepted political and philosophical idea in the sense that it takes the things that have happened and builds a judgment based on that. Essentially, it only focuses on the consequences of actions. If you fail to, if you leave the ice cream out by accident, it doesn't matter if it was an accident or not, you get judged for leaving the ice cream out. You failed at your task of putting the ice cream away, the ice cream is melted, and as such, everyone else suffers because of your actions. It deals a lot with the consequences of actions and ignores the kind of morals and intentions of the person behind it. Now, it's got a solid founding because you can never be truly 100% certain about someone else's morals, and you can be 100% certain about the fact that the ice cream has melted. Obviously, assuming like within the realms of reason. We could get into that philosophy of determining how do you know that you know that you know, and go from there. But I find that sort of philosophy useless and not very helpful to any situation. And so we're just assuming within the realms of reason. But essentially, consequentialism doesn't deal with the situations that it can't be certain of. It only uses the information that it can certify, and as such, it's a very sort of logical it's kind of got a mathematics feel to it, in the sense that this led to this, that led to this, and so this is the original cause, and the guilt lies here. Nice and simple in its basis principle. Obviously, it's because of its limitation of not being able to judge morality or intention. It can't really be used for judging an individual's morality or what sort of is it, because it's so focused on dealing with the situation. It doesn't deal with the character. It doesn't deal with the person, and as such, it leaves the actual individual up to fate, or it sees the individual more as an object rather than a person. And that, of course, limits how much you can blame someone on a moral level. You can't call someone an evil or a good person, because of. So yeah, it's definitely got its benefits, but it's also got its limitations. Intentionalism is basically the opposite, but unlike consequentialism, which has a solid political and philosophical grounding, intentionalism is a word I'd made up just to be the opposite of it. Consequentialism might be official, but I've actually found that intentionalism tends to be more prominent between, most people, not people who don't have particularly high amounts of power tend to follow this ideal. I've seen it a lot. It doesn't matter that you left the ice cream out, as long as you intended to put it away, means that you can still be judged as a good person morally. And of course, everything that consequentialism deals with, intentionalism deals with the opposite. It deals with the individual's character, their intentions, their morals. It's very useful for judging whether you're a good person or a bad person. Assuming omnipotence, of course. Omniscience. Whatever the omni word means, like true and certain knowledge. Obviously, again, this has to be taken within the realms of reason. You can't truly know someone's intentions, but with understanding and essentially a background and a history of a certain character, you can build some assumptions and say that yes, this guy is most likely telling the truth, or this guy most likely isn't. Obviously, both of these philosophies are quite popular, but what they end up doing is taking guilt and responsibility and just breaking it down into one of the two components. They're not taken together. And what this means is whenever any judgment is made from any of these perspectives, while it might have a solid founding on the perspective that it's focused on, it's obviously got no other sort of perspective. So you're judging, you can judge someone for one thing or another without taking into account the other aspect. And I find this very limiting. By having two kind of singular aspects that are meant to work together and yet aren't, you end up separating, guilt and responsibility, from itself. And so it just becomes mostly useless. Consequentialism, no use in determining whether someone's a good person or not. Intentionalism, no use in actually dealing with the situation at hand. Both of them are no use in most situations, when dealing with another factor to the situation that exists. And because of this limitation, I thought I'd come up and design, at least somewhat design, my own interpretation, or how I use these two philosophies together, within the degrees of reason, to come up with a better solution. Now, what I've decided to split morality down into, or guilt down into, is two factors: moral guilt and intellectual guilt. Moral guilt obviously deals with your intentions. Are you going to be selfish, selfless, or not, or neither? Or both? Is your action built on both personal gain and the gain of everyone else, mutual gain essentially, or is it built on no gain at all and is just an action? Obviously, philosophies like the idea that you can't be altruistic, they all exist. But for the sake of this, we're assuming that people can be selfless and do something for someone else. Just to make things, just because otherwise it gets kind of chaotic, because I'll have to keep on going over points that most people can understand and aren't really that important. But to understand the thing is, intellectual guilt then deals with the ability for someone to be able to foresee the consequences of an action and act on it. So your ability to understand the consequences of an action you're about to do, and be able to actually do something to manipulate those outcomes. It's no use in being able to see that the train is going to crash into that tree on the track if you can't do anything about it. If you can shout at the driver, or the tree's small enough that you can pull it off yourself, then that's different. But if you can't do anything about it, then there's again that you can't really take any intellectual guilt because your ability was not there. So these 2 points however need to be considered together to truly get a full perspective. And oftentimes you will use knowledge of one type of guilt to learn the other. So if you know someone is a good person, okay, then you use that sort of goodness that you know about them to influence the fact, to help you determine how far they can foresee the consequence of an action, and vice versa. You know how intelligent someone is, so it's likely that they would have been able to foresee that, and be able to act accordingly. For example, a train driver would probably know how fast the train that they run every day can work, and so they would know, especially when you so they would know their train could get to this location at this point, and so you can blame them because they would have the intelligence to figure that out. They would have the knowledge, and so you can blame them for being immoral because they took these people to this destination within that time frame, with the full knowledge of that happening. You can make these sort of judgments. You know how much knowledge the train driver has, and so you can build a judgment based on that. Or in the ice cream example, the guy doesn't know that the fridge is broken, or the freezer is broken, and so you can't really blame him morally for putting the ice cream in the freezer, because the freezer was still ice cold when he put it in. It hadn't had time to defrost, and so you can judge him morally for being morally okay. A good example that I found to kind of determine this sort of scenario is in a game, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, when you're on the planet Nar Shaddaa. It's essentially a refugee-style sort of a criminal-based planet with crime and refugees being the main thing here. And you are on your own personal quest. The important scenario here, however, is kind of a well-discussed sort of scenario within the game. It's the beggar paradox, or the beggar principle. I haven't really decided on a name yet, but I feel like it could have some sort of philosophical naming, like but I feel like it could be an example to be used. And essentially, it's this: you are a powerful individual, and while you have just entered this planet in this scenario, you have already proven yourself to be a skillful, wealthy, and powerful individual. And a beggar knows this. He comes up to you and asks you for some money. Now, you have it's hardly any money for you, hardly noticeable. By this point, you've got more money, enough to buy starships, so the amount of money he's asking for is negligible. £1, £2, if you earn like £300 a day, that sort of thing. And he comes up to you and starts begging you for money. Now, obviously, you've got two things you can do. He will not leave voluntarily. You have to either scare him away or give him the money. That's basically your choices. Now, and this is kind of where the philosophy starts. On the surface, giving the money to the beggar is the initial moral action. On the surface, it seems like the good thing. You are being selfless because the beggar has an increase in resources and can, use that to better their own life. And vice versa, scaring them away is putting specific effort into not give a beggar money that you have plenty of and really doesn't affect you in any way. And so depending, if you choose the good option, you get good side points, and if you choose the bad option, you get bad side points. However, your mentor at this point shows you a vision of the consequences of the actions. They show the beggar, if let's say you did the moral thing and gave the beggar the money, your mentor, she shows you a vision of the beggar walking away with the money, and then two other beggars come up and beat him up, take the money, and leave that guy bruised and bloodied on the ground. Now, even though you made the moral choice in giving the guy money, you turned him into a target, and that target that you actively made him because of the money that he had, has made his life worse off. So even though you're a moral person, the world is actually in a worse place because of your actions. And so in this instance, while you might be morally pure, you are intellectually guilty because you could not foresee that giving him the money would turn him into a target that he would, otherwise not be able to avoid. Now, vice versa, if you don't give him the money, he goes off, bullies some other people, gets money off them, and he becomes stronger for it, well, I wouldn't say this is leaving the world in a better place than you found it. The point is, your initial idea of not benefiting him, has ended up flawed as well. Essentially, he is stronger because of the decision to scare him away. Now, what this example shows is that your intention, can very much differ from your actual, what you leave on the planet. A more kind of conventional scenario is still a beggar on the road. Again, you're reasonable, you've got the amount of money, and you see him on the road. You don't have to scare him away this time, but you've got the choice of giving him the money or not. Now, again, the initial choice might be, the surface level choice might be, giving him the money is moral, not giving the money is immoral. And yet, if you do some further thinking, you might come to realize that actually, because of the kind of demographic in this city, you know fully well that it's most likely the money that you give him will be spent on, things that will worsen his life, or will be taken by others, or he will report back to some sort of superior and pay that superior. And so there's a really, really good chance that whatever money you give will make his life worse, or at least not better it. And so, in many cases, it might make it worse. And so, is it really moral to give him the money? And what this means is, though two people could do different actions, one could give him the money and one could not. It, depending on their reasoning, depending on their intelligence, would determine whether they're moral or not. The first guy who only did a surface level thought could be just as morally good as the guy who actually thought through the situation. It's just the latter, the second guy, is more likely to have left the world in a better place. And obviously, you can continue this thought process even more. Your intellectual guilt, your intellectual capacity can go even further, and you can think, actually, I should give him the money because he's likely to return to. If he returns to his boss without any money, it's likely that he's going to be hurt or abused, or just not being given his food or whatever. And so while the money I give him might not go to him, it will still protect him, or at least somewhat, make his life better. You can keep on thinking things. Now, obviously, you can overthink things. He might just be a beggar looking for some money that he's going to spend on food. And even if you consider that he's working as an employment on like a spy thing, that can lead to a degree of overthinking. And again, you are intellectually guilty. Essentially, it's about getting the right sort of thinking through it in the right amount, not overthinking things, but not underthinking things. So much so that you can then make an action based on your morality and actually leave the world in a better place. The problem with this idea, of course, is that it incentivizes laziness, because it takes a lot of you can only dedicate a certain amount of energy to different actions. Okay, emotional and mental energy are some of the ones that we have in most limited reserves of, and so when you're deciding how far to think things through, the more you think things through, the more energy you expend. And so it might just be easier to not think things through thoroughly, so you can class yourself as a moral person while taking the lazy decision, giving the beggar money. And the world moves on, even if the beggar's position is worse than it's before. You've saved your own energy by not thinking it through. Now, I don't think this is a great way to kind of justify morality, because I think a moral action is bettering yourself, so the rest of the world is not having to support you. If you can support yourself, do it, because then it means that other people don't have to support you, and they can dedicate resources to bettering themselves. And so I think being able to understand and read through a situation to leave the world in a better place than it actually is a moral obligation that each and every one of us should be putting forward. And if you're actively not doing that, then that is an immoral decision at a more core level than a specific level. Because we've got to take into account individual decisions might be moral or not, but we've got to also take into account core principles of our humanity, and thinking through decisions to determine whether they're actually going to make life better or not, I think is one of those core decisions that everyone should, needs to have. Obviously, it can get to the realm of impracticality. If you think through everything so thoroughly that you don't have any time to actually do anything, then that is, again, immoral, because you're not actually making change. So it's about finding a balance between how far to think things through, how much energy to dedicate to it, and then of course actually being a good person and wanting to do good. Because we do have to take into account, essentially we have a lot to take into account when we judge these moralities, and a lot of what I've presented can be easily manipulated for someone who doesn't have who is immoral, to better convince others that they are. it's just something to be cautious of. Now, the thing is, when it comes to judging someone else's morality, you've got to work with what information you have and then expand upon that. For example, you know what, I've just had another idea for a video as I was talking, and I need to find a pen to write it down before I forget, because I will forget. And I'm obviously not going to tell you, but I'm going to leave this edit in to show you how chaotic my life is. It'll most likely be an expansion on this video, if I can somehow work it in. But either way, so when you're judging someone, you've got to take into account the sort of context in which they exist. How much do you know this person? If you know that if you spend a lot of time around them and you know that they enjoy certain activities or kind of a nerd in some aspects, then you can try your best to relate that to the current situation, and then kind of build from that. Now, you've got to understand that this system that I'm proposing is, built from a teenager's head over the course of a year, without any sort of critiques from family members or anyone. Not because I haven't told them, but because, the world decided to give up on itself, so they had bigger concerns. And so it hasn't really been challenged, and I've just solidified it into my own head. So just be cautious about that. But, my point still stands. A useful thing that can be done with this philosophy, however, is it can help to determine punishments. Because there are plenty of punishments that I feel like are... There are plenty of punishments that I feel are more suited to dealing with a situation than an intention, and vice versa. For example, rehabilitation might be better suited for, rather than dealing with someone's intentions and morals, but instead the consequences of their actions. People want to give up drugs or smoking or whatever, and yet they can't do it. And so, while their intention is fine and set and doesn't need changing, it's their actions and their ability that does. And so you essentially take a consequentialist approach and apply rehabilitation to someone who you've judged their intention is fair and solid. However, vice versa, if someone is deliberately trying to manipulate someone, okay, it doesn't really matter the result of the situation. The punishment should be there to address that sort of sense of morality and dealing with that. Now, rehabilitation might work there, but I found that there's a saying that give me a child from the age of 2 till 7, and I will give you a man for the rest of their life, or something like that. I can't remember. The ages might have varied, and the exact wording might be different. But the idea is the sort of nurture you have from in the early stages of your life will determine, if for most people, like 99% of people, will determine, where you end up, what sort of person you are being. Now, not entirely sure I adhere to that belief truly, mainly because I used to be a total arse when I was young, and I've, gotten out of that, I believe. I'm still a narcissist. But it's still something worth considering. And so when you're dealing with someone's intentions being inherently or morally flawed, then it's much harder to address that and change it. And so you've got to essentially deal with a sort of deterrent system or retribution system. Now, I'm not really trying to, in that last bit about punishments, I wasn't really trying to say exactly what I believe, but more of just kind of exploring the idea that you can build a punishment system based on the guilt that someone has, and use that to judge to judge the punishment. A lot of because I work at a bar, I found that a lot of people get punished similarly for similar things, even though the person behind it is very different. And it doesn't really matter what the situation is, but one person you can say, no, you deserve everything that's come to you, but another person who's done exactly the same thing, you think, actually, I don't see why it was so harsh on you. Okay, and it's essentially the law system that we have in the Western world doesn't really account for the two different types of responsibility. It treats them all as one without understanding that they need to be understood separately and then woven together, rather than just treated as a singular identity. So yeah, just a kind of a rambling towards the end, but I feel like the crux and the solid center of my philosophy is grounded and fair. I'm going to do a bunch of editing to make it easier to listen to, but I do hope that my general premise was gotten through. I don't think I missed anything out. I've been checking my notes on a little pad that I use for taking orders at work, and everything seems to have been said. So, yeah. Well, I'm an awkward teenager. I'm going to sign off awkwardly, cut out a bunch of stuff, and see you all some other time. Remember to hit all those buttons down below, because I find that those buttons are really quite important to me. I like watching big numbers grow, and because I've got this new audio and stuff that I think actually sounds good, and visuals that don't glitch out and lag even if they are fuzzy all over, I just hit those buttons, watch it all go up, and I will be very, very happy, and I will make that video I was talking about halfway through. Now I'm going to go and listen to this back just to make sure that I don't have to do it all over again.